Wasn't even sit here because it's right there.
All right, now we're recording. Yeah, so I'll know what Jessica says about me. Yeah, she's here to keep me honest. So, or moderately honest. So what we're doing today, this is the first installment of the Art of Marriage, the Art of Marriage Repair and Maintenance. What we're going to be talking about today is like all overview. So we're going to kind of cover everything that we're going to talk about for the next like 8 or 9 weeks. All right. And the background for all of this is kind of the product of like the last 3 years of my reading and study and chasing after like trying to be a better husband. You can ask Jessica afterward how it's going. I just blew that candle out.
Okay.
Now everybody who watches this is going to think, what candle?
You want me to stop it and do start?
No, you're going to walk past and anyway.
We had wine and cheese and...
I know we had wine and
candlelight.
cheese and... oh, would somebody like to volunteer to do snacks next week?
What's next week? They're in front of me.
Okay, I have no idea. 7 days from now. Real quick, the goals, kind of the overview here, our goals, what we aren't shooting at. A lot of times I talk to guys who dread the idea of going to marriage anything because it's very feminizing, or like the expectations are fairly like, well, here's how you become like your wife in order to, do a better job of, being a husband. And that's not really the objective. I'm trying to do, when I put this together, I tried to make it as accessible as possible to both men and women. And we'll see how I do. But like the objective for this is not to teach you how to be the sensitive guy who cries all the time and everything else, unless you already are that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the goal. And so it's not what I'm going to do to you. We're not going to referee who's right and who's wrong. So if you're here to decide who's right and who's wrong in marriage, like, I don't know, the Lutheran church is down the street, I'll have to edit that out later. But I won't. I didn't say which one. And we're not going to talk only in abstracts. There's going to be some abstract stuff. I'm going to try and do as much concrete, like applicable stuff as possible. Does that make sense? Because if you don't know, I mean, to me, if you give me a concept and I don't know how to apply it, it gets very worthless to me very quickly. If you tell me this is what you need to do on these dates at this time, I get a lot better. Not with the dates. I need a secretary for that. So that's what we are not doing. The big goals, like what I'm going after, is kind of 3 levels. It's first off the whys. To my mind, like everything in marriage for Christians is about fulfilling like spiritual duty and about living out kind of the reality of the gospel in your marriage. And I think understanding sort of the big picture makes it easier. It makes it more like realistic to do things. I don't know if that makes sense. There are a lot of things that I do as a husband that I do specifically because I think it is what is the Christ-like thing to do, what the Bible tells me to do as a husband. They aren't things I enjoy doing, they're things I do because it's what I'm supposed to do, and I believe that's what I'm supposed to do, and that's, the reason I do them. We're going to talk about learning to adjust ourselves to make these things doable. If you give me a list of things I hate doing, I'm going to do them for about a week, right? Which is actually why dieting is awful. Because you can't, if you don't do things you want to do, like eventually at the point where I forget it, I don't want to do it, or if you make me do something, I'm not going to do it for any length of time. So it's not just like talking about the why, but it's also how to adjust so that you reach the point that you're able to do it. And then changing the how and the what, like the behavioral stuff, which is sort of the 3 levels, which I think might be my next slide. There are 3 levels that we're going to focus on, the spiritual and the mind, which is kind of the biblical component, right? We're going to talk a lot about Ephesians 5 for the next few weeks, which is kind of one of the, it's one of those passages that you can use very wrong or you can use it very right. And if you look at your job in that passage as a husband or as a wife and you try to live that out, it becomes incredibly challenging. And there's a lot to it. And so we're going to talk a lot about that and sort of how to get your mind into that place. If I was going to compare it to anything, there was a story I read where this man's walking down the street. He walks past 3 bricklayers, right? And he walks up to the first guy and he says to the first bricklayer, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm laying bricks." What does it look like I'm doing? He says, "Okay." He goes to the second guy, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making $20 an hour." Says, "All right, still don't know what, you know." And he goes to the next guy, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm building a cathedral." Right? Like big picture, middle picture, immediate picture, right? And the big picture is the spiritual stuff. What am I doing? I'm imitating Christ as a husband. What am I doing? I'm living out the gospel in my marriage. So that's the first component. The heart and desire, like wanting to do what you're supposed to do, desiring to live out these parts of your life, understanding how that works is kind of the second component. And it sort of makes those connect. We had a conversation with a couple of people in this room the other day where I was talking about how I had to deal with somebody I was upset with, and I knew what the gospel said, you know, what Jesus teaches, and I knew what I wanted to do, and I was kind of mad because I was like, I don't want to do these things. I'm angry. And it took me quite about a day to figure out how to make those connect, like wanting to do the thing I was supposed to do. I don't know if that makes sense. And that's sort of what makes it easier. If I was told I could lose 100 pounds eating chocolate bars every day, I would knock that out. You include nachos or tacos in that deal every day, no problem. If I could watch TV while I do it, even better. The problem is that like those things don't work. And I got a desire to do the things, and I desire tacos more than I desire to be thin. And so like we're going to talk about adjusting the heart and desire component. And the last thing is action and behavior. It is really hard to make those things connect, isn't it? I mean, it is a very difficult thing sometimes to go from, this is what I know I'm supposed to do, but I just don't want to. Or I just don't like you enough right now to do it. Or I just don't want to talk to you. Or I just, you know, I mean, there are all these things that kind of get in the way of that sort of transition. For the men in the room, this is my, without circles. The spiritual and the mind component is the engine, right? It is the power behind the movement. You know, as long as the engine is turning, as long as the engine is powerful, it'll make things happen, right? The transmission takes your power and it turns it into action, right? And so like you go from the spiritual element, which is the power behind what we do as believers, everything we do, like Jesus died for our sins, we're new creations in Christ, all of that is the power behind how we live as believers. It is the like most important thing. Our heart and desire to obey and follow Christ, you know, or to love our spouse, or to treat them well, or to take care of them, or to, you know, not talk back to them. I don't know. And I'm going to guess here, I'm not the only one who does this, where words come into my head sometimes, and they're not the right words to say. And like they're right there, and I'm thinking, all right, this is what I need to say right now if I want to like sleep on the couch. And like there's sort of a divide that happens there where there's not always a desire to, you know, not win the argument, but to like have a better marriage. And sometimes a desire to win the argument, like, or to really, you always lose the argument when you do it, but you know, that desire thing, that desire that makes you take the extra steps and makes you do the things that you need to do, that makes you invest, and not just like, you know, all right, I'm going to say what I want now, or one of the things Jess and I have trouble with, I'm going to talk about myself quite a bit, not about her. When we start to argue, we'll argue for a little bit, and then I'll say, you know what, you're right. That's it. You're right, completely right, I'm wrong. That's all. It's like, but you don't think that. No, you're right. That's it. I'm done. You know, and what I'm doing is running away from fighting, because I don't want to fight. I don't want to argue. I don't want to hash it out. It's easier for me to say, well, I'm done. And that's an awful habit, right? Like, because I'm not a very good husband, but I'm doing my best. That's not the thing you should say while you're talking, is it? But that's sort of the transmission, is that desire to do better, right? And then action and behavior is a little like your wheels, right? You press the gas, the engine does its thing, the transmission turns, and then the wheels make you go forward. And the actions, if you're missing the first two, but you're doing the right actions, you'll tend to move in the right direction, right? If you're not doing the actions at all, if you're just doing your oh, I understand the spiritual, oh, I understand what I'm supposed to want, but I ain't doing nothing, doesn't matter what you do, like action is it, right? That's in James You know, what good is your faith if you come to a man who's hungry and you say, well, good luck. You know, don't do anything to feed him. You don't really love him. You don't really have faith. You're just, you know, that's worthless. And faith without work, you know, faith without works is dead. Obviously, he's talking about the gospel, but it applies here, right? Like if I know what I'm supposed to be as a man of God, if I know, you know, I feel strongly about it, but I just can't quite get around to doing it, I can still wreck my marriage, right? But weirdly enough, it's the least powerful part. So we're going to kind of go through them. There's going to be a little bit of each week. Sound good? Anybody have questions so far? Because I'm totally rattling stuff off here.
Yeah, your analogy of an axle changes your direction 90 degrees. So.
It does. But the transaxle? All right, Jim, you're not allowed to talk anymore. Sometimes, though, sometimes your heart and desire makes you do things like that, you know, feel counterproductive because you know it's the right thing to do, even though it's not the fun thing, right? So there. All three are important because they work together, right? Sometimes our brain fights with our heart. If we know what we should do, but we don't do it, or we, you know, have this spiritual inclination, this desire to do it, and we do it without wanting to, we won't maintain it. I mean, it really is kind of this cyclical thing. They all have to be in line, and they all have to work together, and they all have to like happen in order for it to work properly. In order for you to have kind of this God-honoring marriage, and for you to have harmony, and for you to be happy together, and for, you know, little birds to fly around your head when you see each other, and, or is it hearts in cartoons? I forget.
Oh.
Twitter-pated, that's the
I thought
word.
it was stars.
Is it a star? Yeah, I guess
Only if one of you is carrying around a rolling.
We're going to start in Ephesians 5, the first spiritual component here. And we're going to pick this verse apart over the next few weeks, but I'm going to touch on a couple of ideas in it. I'm moving through my stuff very quickly, quicker than I thought I would. So, hey, that's enough out of you, buddy. We will talk about kids in a future week, by the way, because kids change the equation. I know they do. Like, it makes it a lot harder to spend time together when there are children in the room. So, like, don't worry, like, we'll talk about children. Yeah. So, in Ephesians 5, toward the end of the passage, and I really quick want to, like, offer some context here. In the preceding verses, what Paul is talking about is he's talking about living moral lives, you know, not living drunk, not doing these things. But a big chunk of that is about, like, acting in love and speaking in love and behaving in love. And then actually at the last line before this is submit to each other out of love, out of reverence for Christ, right? And so, like, there's sort of this component of, hey, we're supposed to submit to each other as believers, meaning if your will offends me, like, I'm supposed to put your needs first. There's sort of this, like, standard action. And so when you see people fighting over the color of carpet in church, that would be the opposite of that, you know? Or, you know, oh, you hurt my feelings because you didn't call me this day, and so now I'm walking away from the fellowship of the body of Christ because, you know, that would be the opposite of that. That's not submitting your needs and your will to others, like, out of reverence for Christ. And that's sort of the model that Jesus gives us. I'm going to get into the passage, I know it. That's the model that Christ gives us when he goes to the cross, right? When he comes to earth as a man, like, that's the model that, you know, that's in, I'm going to say Romans, but I'm probably wrong, where it talks about, you know, being of the very nature of God. He didn't consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, meaning, like, Jesus didn't try to grab a hold of this power and authority. Instead, he took on the nature of a servant, humbling himself even unto death on the cross. Like, and that's the sort of the idea there is, like, Christ put aside his own desires and his own need to demonstrate to us, like, what love is and to die for our sins and so forth. And we're supposed to follow that model. Anyway, so Ephesians 6 is 5. Is everyone still awake? Nobody's throwing fruit yet? My wife's falling asleep. Just to hear me every day. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to husbands in everything to their husbands. We're going to talk about that in a future week. It's funny, Mary's not here, and I had a joke, and she's not here. She attended a class on the Help Meet, I think is what the name of the book was. And I don't know if you've ever heard her talk about it, but the pastor taught it, the male pastor. And he did not, maybe he missed the point. But he talked about this submission being to the extreme that if your husband beats you, you should just take it. Because that's how, like, you serve Jesus. Well, not so much. Okay? This is not what this passage is about. This is about, like, an ideal of, like imitating Christ in the church. Because marriage itself is sort of this earthly institution that's a replica of this heavenly reality, right? The heavenly reality is that Christ died for our sins, and that we follow him and we imitate him and follow his teachings, and we love him and we serve him, and he loves us and he served us by dying for us, and he, all these things that are back and forth. And wives have this role, and this role is, according to Paul, to take the spot of the church, which means love, it means follow, it means learn from, it means all of these things, right? And a lot of times what you'll see is, and it's sort of the old, you see a lot of husbands will take that and they'll say, this is your job, right? Got that, woman? Submit to your husband. Not quite the point, right? Like, so from this day forward, if you are a husband or a wife, look at the instructions that apply to you, not your spouse's instructions. Got it? Got that, John? Because Paul is addressing wives at this point, not husbands, right? He's not saying husbands demand your wives submit to you. He's not saying husbands demand your wives serve you at all times. He's not saying husbands demand your wives, cower before you. Like, this is not what he's talking about. He's saying, wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife. And we'll talk about that headship thing in a future week. That actually may be next week. I'm not quite certain. I haven't decided that yet. But, so that's wives. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he may sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle, or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So, this is this half of the verse everybody misses, right? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. The word love there, is not eros. There are like several words for love in Greek, which there should be in English. We should have several words, because love kind of loses its meaning in English, because we say, I love pancakes, yes. I love tacos, I love the dog, I love the kids, I love my car, I love my job, I love my wife. And it's not all the same thing, right? We're clearly talking about different kinds of love. Husbands, love your wives is not eros, which is sort of the Greek word that would describe passionate love. Like this is when you were dating and first married and you couldn't keep your hands off each other, and it was exciting and awesome, and there were no children in the room, and there was no, none of that, and it was like different. And it's that passionate love. That's not the word Paul uses, but because of the limitations of English, it's very easy to read it as eros and think, well, yeah, I love my wife. She's the one who says no all the time, right? Sorry. There may be a PG rating to this series. Which there definitely will be, because we'll end up talking about sex in a future week. I'll get you parental release forms to fill out. But the word love there is actually not logos, which is word.
The logos for this.
Logos. What is the word, John?
Probably agape.
It is agape. Agape refers to the perfect love that God has for his people. It is a selfless love. It is a self-sacrificing love. It is a all about you and not about me love, right? Christ demonstrates agape love by dying for us. Christ demonstrates agape love in John by washing his disciples' feet. And I've talked about this before in sermons and stuff, but I cannot emphasize it enough, because I think it's something husbands have to understand in relation to their wives, because there are things you're going to have to do as a husband that you won't like. That you just won't. They're going to feel unnatural for men, right? Like talking and asking questions and being supportive and stuff like that. I mean, there are things that we just have to do. And like, so when we see in John leaves out communion, but he gives us foot washing, right? When Jesus washes his disciples' feet, he literally strips down to a towel, which is the costume worn by the lowest servant in the house. There are examples of literature from the first century that make fun of guys who had this job. I'm trying to think of somebody who has this like same kind of job in our culture, where it's so low that everybody makes fun of them. Probably pastor, used car salesman, congressman. But he gives up his dignity to serve his disciples. And actually, like, it's so unheard of because, like, there were lawsuits in Jewish culture over whether or not certain people could wash each other's feet. Like, there's an example of a mother wanting to wash her son's feet as a show of, like, affection. And he says no and, like, files a lawsuit to prevent her from doing it because the Jewish people are weird, I guess, in the ancient world. And they had this whole series of discussions. They decide, yeah, in an extreme act of devotion and love, you can do that, but, you know, you can't demand it, and it's not an everyday thing, and all these other things. And Jesus says, listen, if you're going to love each other to the point of humiliation. Like, put yourself away and love people to this degree. So when Paul writes, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, he's talking about an extreme kind of love. This is not the kind of love that says, wife, obey and bring me a sandwich. And do it during the commercial break, right? Like, it's just not that. It is a very difficult thing. It is the thing that makes it so, like, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. So he gave himself up to her that he may sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So now, if Jesus is described as taking care of the church and cleaning her and preparing her for eternity, then men have another job, right? It is like when we talk about leadership in the family, part of the man's job is to make sure that his family is growing spiritually and to lead them in that respect. It means that you like study and know what you're talking about. It means that you live out an example of it. It means that you love when you don't want to love. It means that you're affectionate when you don't want to be affectionate. It means that you serve when you don't want to serve. It means that you turn the TV off and wash dishes, which is awful, but it's important to do sometimes, right? Because it's the way you show your spouse you love them. It's a concrete example. We'll talk about those things a little later. But like, this is what it comes down to, men. Like Paul describes our job. Our job is huge. Our job is much bigger than her job. Our job is to love sacrificially, die if necessary, die to herself daily, and lead our wives to spiritual growth. Because there will be no marriage in heaven, but you will probably know each other. Does that make sense? And so there's going to be a day when you stand before Jesus together, and I'm looking forward to well done, good and faithful servant, but I would really appreciate, wow, you helped me do this better, you helped me get here better. Because that's part of your job, gentlemen. Like, your job is eternal in consequence. Raise up your children in the way they should go is another element of that. Your job is to raise your family spiritually, to lead and to help them grow and to, facilitate that and to go to church with them and to, anyway, I digress. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, man shall leave his mother and father, or father and mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Now, Paul kind of comes to the end and he says, listen, the story in Genesis points back to Christ. And so our marriages point back to Christ. This is what it's all about. It's all about Jesus. And so as you live out your marriage, understand you're representing Jesus in this world. Your kids are seeing Jesus through you the first time. Okay? Huge, huge, huge. Not to be taken lightly. Huge. The other end of that is, like, love is your own body. I don't know about y'all. Like one of my favorite activities on Saturday afternoons is to stretch out in the hammock and to drink iced tea and to read and to listen to music and to enjoy the wind and to enjoy the quiet and to relax. I also enjoy laying on the couch and eating junk food and watching TV. And I also enjoy, I mean, there are things as a guy, I think maybe everybody might enjoy certain things, but men, we enjoy things, right? You know, I look forward to eating good sandwiches. They're seldom brought to me on the couch, but we're working on that. I love you, honey. I love these things. I enjoy these things because they like fill my body and I taste them. And we're supposed to look at our spouse, at our better half. We're supposed to like look at them as we do our own bodies. So as much as I love eating sandwiches and tacos and stuff, I'm supposed to enjoy like helping my wife enjoy her life. I'm supposed to enjoy like taking care of my wife the same way that I enjoy the things that I enjoy for me, right? Our whole attitude is supposed to shift to one of love. Now,
You didn't read the last line.
I didn't read the last line, but I will again in a minute. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let his wife see that she respects her husband. We're going to talk about that in the next section. So the basic idea is we're supposed to imitate Christ in the church and marriage. Everybody caught that? I think I said it 8 or 9 times. Cannot emphasize it enough. Selflessness is a huge part of this discussion. If you walk into your marriage or if you walk into your marital discussion saying, what am I going to get out of this? You will screw up, right? It will never, ever, 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 ever work because you will fight over what you can get and you will get stuck, right? We have a sinful side that's going to come into play and we'll talk about that like toward the end. But like the main goal as a believer in marriage is selflessness. Making that sustainable is difficult and it's a team effort, right? If it's a one-sided thing, it becomes a whole other conversation and we will talk about that in a future week. But it basically at that point it comes down to serving Jesus by serving your husband, right? And that's hard because like, anyway, or serving Christ by serving your wife or what have you. Marriage is meant to prepare us for eternity. Men, you learn to be better believers by serving your family. One of the qualifications for church leadership given in Timothy, I believe, is where Timothy is told, look at the family of the man you're considering making a leader. If he cannot lead his family properly, he does not belong as a leader in the church. Meaning if you cannot serve your family, if you can't love them, if you can't help them grow spiritually, you are not living out your life as a Christian properly, right? Peter tells us that if you're not right with your wife, basically God isn't hearing your prayers, right? You know, he says so your prayers may not be hindered. And so God takes it that seriously. You're not following Christ properly if you're not living your marriage out properly. It is a huge deal, and you signed up for it willingly, most of you. I don't know, it's Montana, people carry guns. I could not talk Rebecca into letting her dad carry a gun down the aisle, but but I think I might get the Potters to do that. But it'll be her carrying the gun. And they're not here. They were supposed to be here today. They're not, so I can't even turn that knife on them. We both have roles to play in the process. Our roles are different, and that's all there is to it. Men and women are different. This is kind of a theological point. I don't want to argue about it. There's this like, oh, well, you know, husband, head of the wife, you know, that we just looked at. There are some folks that take that literally. That's the way I'm going to approach it. If you don't like it, please argue with me about it. I'm happy to argue. There are folks who say, well, that passage is about mutual submission. It is. But it's not just about mutual submission. It also talks about our roles. We don't have the same roles. Men and women are different, right? They just are. So we all have roles to play in the whole process. Love and respect, they're key to the whole thing, right? That is the last line. Men love your wives. Wives respect your husbands. We will talk about love and respect at length. I have a video. Let's see if I can get it to play. We're going to shift gears here, by the way.
It's just, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this, I don't know, is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
All right. I'm going to try and include videos. There's a lot of really funny things out there that kind of work with this topic, but like men and women are different, right? And like this becomes sort of this foundational problem in relationships and in marriage. And it's for a whole lot of different reasons, and we'll talk about it as we go. I think there was another video I wanted to use. It was a manslator, where like it translated woman talking to man. And we'll actually probably do that one next week. We'll look at it. It's pretty great. But like that men and women, like on so many different levels, we communicate differently, right? When my wife says it's fine, do what you want, I've learned to understand that doesn't mean it's fine, do what you want. It means don't do what you want. It means if you do what you want, you will die.
You'd
an
be
evil
dead by
death
now
is
if
actually
that
what-
were the case.
What?
I said you would be dead by now if that were actually the case.
Potentially. We tend to see situations differently. We tend to fight and argue differently. There are all sorts of things that kind of play out there, like men and women are just different. And because of that, when we get to the behavioral part, at the end of this, we're going to do material from a book called His Needs, Her Needs. And it's about meeting like intimate needs in marriage and meeting other needs in marriage, like meeting each other's needs. And like one of the basic premises of the book, and I actually never understood it until I read it in grad school, that men and women just want different things, right? Like you don't see the world in the same way, and they're just geared differently. And because of that, like I did things and I thought, well, this will make my wife happy. And in reality, it didn't. You know, and there's that running joke, like if I give my wife an anniversary gift and it's a vacuum cleaner, I'm gonna die, right? But you know what, if you got me a new power tool, I'd probably be pretty happy, right? I mean, that would actually make me pretty happy. I would get blisters and everybody would make fun of me and I'd have to go to the emergency room once or twice, but it would be a good gift, because tools are good gifts. And so men look at their wives and they think, what do you do? What sort of tools do you need? I mean, it makes sense. It's just dumb, because it's a failure to see how women see the world, how women interact with the world, how they are. Men and women and how they relate to their environment. What I wanted to talk about here, there was a study done with boys and girls, little boys and little girls, right? And some of y'all have heard me talk about this before, like where they took a bunch of little girls and they put them in a room together with a bunch of chairs, and the little girls took all of their chairs and put them in a circle. And they sat down and they sat there for a little bit, and then they started talking to each other about their hair and about the room and about their feelings and about all sorts of things. They all faced each other and they all talked, right? And they interacted, because that's kind of how women are. Women, they tend to talk to each other more. Women tend to, another study was done with children on a playground, where they recorded sounds of children playing, like in elementary school, and they found that girls had much larger vocabularies and said significantly more words as children, because that part of their brain and that part of their personality just developed faster, and they talk to each other. Boys, on the other hand, were more likely to make noises like vroom and bang and pew and all of these other things. Boys made noises and they ran around and they knocked each other over and they didn't talk. They did stuff, which is the same, the study that I talked about a little bit ago, where they put all the boys in the room, they lined their chairs up and they sat facing the room and they talked about what they could do. We could climb up there. Hey, what if we knocked that girl over? We could pull her hair. Hey, what if, they faced in the same direction. Nobody wanted to face each other. And they talked about what they could do because all they were interested in doing was manipulating their environment, right? The girls were more interested in talking to each other. And like that continues into adulthood. There are variations with personality type. Some people are less talkative. I'm a boy and I'm very talkative, right?
Yes.
Thank you. We're 35 minutes in already and I've been talking the whole time. But they tend to relate and interact with their environment very differently. Men look at a situation and the first thing they say is, how do I fix this? How do I make it better, right? Women talk about the pressure in their head and how they can't sleep anymore, and they want you to say, oh, I'm sorry, you're not sleeping well, and they want you to relate to them. What do men do? Let me tell you how to fix this, right? This is the difference between men and women, like in the way that we communicate and interact. This becomes a problem in relationships, it becomes a problem in communication, it becomes a problem in all sorts of things. I read an article, or I read a part of this book. I'm reading this for this class. I've read, I think, every other book this guy has written. But he talks about the differences in brains, like just brain anatomy, which is really interesting. For example, the corpus callosum, I'm not a doctor, a band of fibers that connects the two hemispheres of the brain together. In women, it's much larger. Like they have a much larger interconnection between their brains, which is why women tend to be more intuitive, because like the two halves of their brain tend to communicate a little more effectively and they tend to think things through differently and they're more intuitive in their judgments. Men tend to not be as intuitive, but they tend to interact a little more concretely. Women tend to take more information into account as well when they make decisions. Men look at what's on the table right now and they deal with it, right? Women tend to like see the bigger picture. It's just the tendency. The inferior partiential lobule, yeah, again, not a doctor, is proportionally larger in the male, especially in the left hemisphere, which is actually why men tend to be better at math. My wife's better at math than I am. But it's why men tend to be better at math and they tend to do those sorts of spatial jobs better, because it's just like they tend to develop better in that way. The two language association structures, the superior temporal gyrus and the inferior frontal gyrus, are proportionally larger in the female brain, which is why women talk more. And they interact with their world by talking. Men, our brains are not right for talking. It's not our fault, except mine. But it's why I say the dumbest things in the dumbest moments. And you have to take into account that it's because I'm brain damaged. The partial region of the brain, the parietal portion of the brain is thicker in the female, and it inhibits their ability to deal with things spatially, to rotate them, and to look at them and to understand interrelationship between objects, which is why men tend to be a little more mechanical and tend to enjoy mechanics a little more, because our brains are geared for it, right? It's what we're good at. Last one that I'm going to talk about, I know this is really abstract, but I thought it was completely, like, I was taken aback. I was like, wow, this is... the way that men and women handle hormones in stressful situations, women are geared, when threatened, to take care of children, or take care of people around them, or take care of themselves, right? Their first reaction, because of like the presence of estrogen and a few other hormones, they tend to respond to danger by care, right? Let's take care of the people around us, let's take care of the kids, we'll take care of ourselves. Men, on the other hand, you put me in a situation where there's danger, and what do?
Run.
I'm going to run away or I'm going to fight, right? I don't run away, thank you. But here's why this is, actually this last part I really wanted to touch on, because when men and women start to argue, right, women usually want to argue it out until you get to the conclusion. men will either yell, or if they've been married long enough, they'll shut up, right?
No.
Because their first instinct is to fight,
Which doesn't end
and they fight, but then they learn that fighting is a stupid thing to do because it gets you in a lot more trouble later. And so when they get threatened, their immediate response is, can't fight, what do I do?
Run!
And since I don't run, I can't like leave the house, I shut down, right? And it's one of the reasons men tend to shut down in arguing, because it is just a heck of a lot easier than fighting. Because we know if we fight, we're gonna get in trouble, right? And I mean, just kind of an interesting thing. Here's why this is an advantage and a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage because men and women tend to communicate really badly because of it. We tend to interact ineffectively. We tend to meet each other's needs kind of wrong because we don't understand each other. We tend to, you know, not buy each other good gifts. We tend to we just don't understand each other. And so there's this huge disconnect. The positive thing is if you can ever get to a point where you actually work together and you're in harmony, your weaknesses will supplement each other and your strengths will supplement each other. And so if you can play by your strengths instead of by your weaknesses will screw you up. Jim is falling asleep. Your strengths, your strengths will make it so you act better. Jess and I were in Canada.
Lethbridge.
It was in Lethbridge, and we were doing this thing called a puzzle room or an escape room, where they lock you in a room and you have this mystery to solve to get out. And you have an hour. And it was the coolest thing because as we did it, Jess solved certain kind of puzzles better than I did, and I solved other kinds of puzzles better. And the way that we interacted, like my strengths fit her weaknesses and her weaknesses fit my strengths.
Yes.
Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, flip that, reverse it.
This is rather puzzling.
But like that's the way it is. When we do what we're supposed to do properly, we work together great, and it is awesome. When we don't, it turns into a problem. What it translates into regarding marriage. First off, you have to work really hard together, right? You have to talk a lot, but not just talk. You have to talk in a way that makes sense. Like if we have to sit around and talk about my feelings for an hour, we probably won't do it, right? But if we talk about why certain things are working or why they're not, why I'm getting mad and why I'm not, why this is happening, why that's happening, like we can tend to work together a lot better. But it means that you actually have to put effort in and you have to forgive each other and you have to show a lot of grace and you have to submit to each other's needs and you have to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully this class will make all that stuff a whole lot easier. Everybody with me? Let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let his wife see that she respects her husband. So that was the spiritual portion, and then the difference between men and women, which we will not talk about every week. We probably will just because it's funny. We're going to talk a little bit about our attitudes. Men, the attitude you are told to have in relation to your wife is love, right? It is very easy to get lost in this and to think that love is this feeling. Love is twitterpation. Love is, you know, the gushy things that they sing about in songs. That's not exactly what it's talking about. It is a part of it, but it also relates to our behavior, right? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. It relates to our behavior. I love my wife in the things that I do. If I feel nice towards her, but I don't go to work anymore because I don't want to, and so I don't pay our bills, and I don't bring money home, and I don't take care of the kids, and I can feel any way I want, like in reality, I'm not really doing my job right, right? Everybody with me? See if I can get my slides back. Gotta be kidding. Anybody need to use the bathroom?
We have the slides.
Oh, you do, but I can't look at them. Well, I guess I can.
You have another sheet up there?
Hmm?
You have one of these?
Oh, no, I do have the slides. I have the digital copy. Though I did just close it, which was smart. All right, you've got it, so you'll have to follow along on your own. I don't have any more videos. Come on.
Still videos.
Yeah, still videos. All right, so love and respect refers to attitudes that shape our actions, words, and interactions with each other. They're the transmission part. I talked about that. They're what makes it possible. They're what makes it sustainable, right? Like, because your relationship stuff isn't going to be sustainable if you can't manage to actually love your wife. You can change how you feel, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But some of you might be sitting here, or at different times in your lives, may have looked at your spouse and said, I know I'm supposed to love you, but I don't really, right? Or I know I'm supposed to respect you, but I'm pretty well past that right now. I just want to kill you. Like, it is super easy to hit that point, right? And what Paul is giving us here is a direction for our behavior, and we have to drive toward changing our attitude. We're going to talk a little bit about that in probably next week, actually, how we adjust our attitude and how this shapes our behaviors. But the right approach with this is based on the other person's needs. If I love my wife and I express it by trying to sleep with her as much as possible, women tend to be less driven by that sort of thing. They tend to be a little more oriented toward things like cuddling, right? Which men tend to have less interest in, except in building up towards like the whole sex thing, right? It is what it is. And we'll talk about that way down the way, like 4 weeks from now. We're going to talk quite a bit about that. But if I don't recognize what my wife's needs are and I don't try to meet those needs, then I'm not really being loving. And so some of this is about understanding what the other person's needs and having conversations about it. See if I can. The interesting thing is that men tend to speak in terms of respect a little easier, and women tend to speak in terms of love a little easier. If you ask a man if his wife loves him, even if they're not getting along, he'll usually say, yeah, I'm pretty sure she loves me, right? May not think she respects him, but he'll usually say, yeah, she loves me, right? And in turn, like, wives, anyway. So love and respect are more than just feelings. They're an attitude, they're a behavior, they're how we tone everything that we do. Couple of verses here, Matthew 7:12, and everything therefore treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. Matthew 7:12. The reason I included this is when I worked at the children's home, I would talk to these nasty little gangster kids who would say, well, I'll respect anyone who respects me. Guess what that turns into? If you won't respect me first, I'm not going to respect you first, right? And spouses, sometimes it turns into that, well, he's not nice to me, so I'm not going to be loving to him. Or she's not nice to me, so I'm not going to be, attentive and loving to her. You won't do what I want, so I'm not going to do what you want, and yeah. Crazy, crazy thing. We're actually supposed to love each other and treat each other regardless of what the other person's doing, right? So I love my wife even when my wife isn't lovable, which she always is. She loves me even when I'm, a big jerk, right? Which is most of the time. Next verse I wanted to share was Matthew 5:43-44. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why would I include this for a marriage passage? Because sometimes the enemy lives in the house with you. Isn't it true? In every relationship will have storming periods. It is a part of being in relationships. It will happen. You will have times you don't get along. You will have times where you don't like each other. You have times where you drift apart. You have times where all sorts of things happen. And the reality is that, if you're supposed to love your enemies, that sure as heck applies to the person you swore to God that you would love forever, right? The same applies in respect. Men tend to not be as wound up by how much you love me and how, syrupy you can talk to me, but men like to be treated with respect. If you talk down to me, it's going to change my attitude. If you treat me like a child, it's going to change how I respond to you. That is more important to men than almost anything else. And for women, to understand this is huge, right? Talking to your husband as though you appreciate him and as though you like the work he does, as though you actually respect him is huge. Men, talking to your wives as though you love them is huge. These are all kind of, a part of this marriage thing. If you were to, this is supposed to apply to enemies. It definitely applies to each other. Grace and forgiveness. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77, or 7 times 7, which is actually 49. I can do math.
70 times 7?
Oh, 70 times 7, I'm sorry, then it's 490.
We hit that in the
I just can't quote scripture. Of course, the 77 or the 70 times 7, right, is symbolic of forever, right? You ain't supposed to stop forgiving. And actually, we get a better story there with the parable of the king who forgives a man who owes him $1 million, and then he throws a man who owes him 5 into prison because he can't pay him back. And the king comes back and says, well, wait a minute, I gave you $1 million. Why couldn't you give him 5? And it applies to us. Like, if you pile up every sin that I have ever committed against God, we are talking the oceans on the planet, right? My sin is enormous. I have a real talent for it. I mean, I have sinned so big over the years, and all of you have too, so don't get high and mighty on me. Our sin is huge, and because of Christ, we're forgiven. And in Christ, we are expected to forgive. If I deal with my spouse and I look at my wife and I say, you did this. Anybody do that in arguments, by the way? You get the list? Or the 2 or 3 huge things that have happened and you're like, this is still there. If you can't forgive those things, basically you're saying this teacup is significant next to this ocean. Got it? Your spouse will never sin against you more than you have sinned against God himself. And forgiveness is a part of the package. It's easier when we're trying. But if you cannot operate in grace and you cannot operate in forgiveness, you're going to get stuck. And love and respect comes down to those things. I love my wife. I forgive her when she messes up. She loves me. I assume she forgives me. As a starting point, if you're going to do anything with your time between this time and next time, you should spend some time praying about this one. Are there things I carry? Because that's huge, right? Like, unforgiven sin turns into bitterness, turns into poison, right? And it's something you have to keep track of, and you have to forgive and forgive and forgive and pray about it and pray for your spouse and pray for... So grace and forgiveness. This is the love and respect portion. Do I have a... Oh, actions. We're at the wheels, and I think I'm losing everyone, so I need to kind of... actions are extremely important, but they're the last line because they need to be directed and sustainable. If your wheels are spinning, but they're spinning in different directions, that's not okay. If I'm trying to go forward, my wheels are dragging me backward, that's a problem. Got it? So, you know, our direction and our sustainability, if I cannot maintain good stuff in my marriage, and this is all about the first 2 parts, but if you're not doing the actions, like the actions are going to affect your spouse more than anything else, more than your thoughts, more than your attitudes, more than your spiritual convictions. Your actions will make the biggest difference. Your job is required regardless of how well they do, right? If your spouse is horrible, you still have to do your job, right? My enemy is awful. You don't know how big of a jerk that guy is. I'm supposed to love him? Surely God didn't mean that guy. Well, you know, spouse too, right? I mean, that's just the truth of it. We have to love our spouses. And love is a verb. Like, it's not, you know, when it says love your wives, that's actually not a noun, right? It's a verb. Respect your husbands, again, verb, not a noun. So I don't have feelings, I have actions that are selfless. And anyway, classical conditioning. Everybody knows what Pavlov is, right? I have a very funny picture there that you probably can't see. The name rings a bell. Pavlov was a Russian scientist who figured out that if he tied dogs down and he rang a bell and fed them, they would drool, right? And like, what he learned from this is, eventually he could take the food away, ring the bell, and they would drool as though they were about to be fed, even though there was no food, because they would learn, this is the sound, and that means I get fed. In dating, okay, we're going to back all the way up to courting. Men and women have certain needs, like their intimate emotional needs. And when you date, you would... All right, real quick, show of hands. Who sat up all night talking to each other? And it was one of your fondest memories. Who can't talk to each other for more than 5 minutes now? Who, you know, when you... Like, yeah. Let's see, it's talking, who would hold hands and cuddle and enjoy being around each other when you were dating, and it just seemed like the best thing in the whole wide world. How many of y'all cuddle now? We do. Yeah, but you're newlywed. Shut up. I mean, things like cuddling tends to drop off, right?
Something better to do.
And actually, that's kind of the trick, and that is where it becomes the trick. And we'll talk about that in the future, more in depth. But it is a good example. What happens is you have these needs that you meet for each other when you first start dating, and then you get married, and you have brand new needs you get to meet for each other, and that's all kinds of fun, right?
But the old needs are still there.
But the old needs are still there, and they don't go away. And it doesn't change the fact that wives prefer to cuddle. Like that physical contact, the hugging, the kissing, the holding hands, the touching each other in passing, that kind of stuff is still important. What happens is men tend to think, well, why would we do those things? There's a main event to get to, right? And it becomes the most important thing, and they stop doing this thing, and at first it's okay because the wife's very happy to meet that need. Eventually you hit a point where it's like, wait a minute, aren't we gonna like hold hands? Aren't we gonna, cuddle? Aren't we gonna kiss? Isn't there something, foreplay or anything? Like these things fall off the ratio. They fall off the radar. And what happens is, whereas, and actually you're gonna get ahead of me here. Once you stop meeting that emotional need, it tends to change how people feel. If you don't meet it long enough, it becomes a deficit, and it becomes a real problem. Right? It tends to change our behavior when our needs aren't met. If you don't meet my need long enough, I'm going to stop trying to meet your need. The key to fostering positive feelings and harmony and twitterpation and all that other stuff is meeting each other's needs, right? Like all of that closeness and stuff that you felt when you were dating and everything, and you think, why can't we be that way anymore? This is fickle. And the reason it is fickle is because feelings are chemical. They are enormously chemical, right? You can make feelings go one way or the other based on some of the craziest things, right? And so feelings should never be your largest guide for things, but they will drive your behavior, and they will drive other things, and they will, but feelings are not the biggest part of this, which all the women are staring at me and thinking, you're a big jerk, horrible man. But the example of this I would point to is a man and a woman, like a man who's been married for a while, they stop meeting each other's needs, they start to grow a little distant, and then suddenly he meets a woman at work who's young and attractive, and she talks to him. And she listens to him, and she is respectful to him, and she treats him like he knows what he's talking about. And she dresses nice to show up to work instead of hanging out in sweats. And eventually that man is looking at her and thinking, man, you meet all these needs I have. Right? And then all of a sudden he starts feeling really good toward her because there's a bell ringing over and over again, and his needs are getting met with that bell. And all of a sudden he has feelings that weren't there before. And that's all chemical. It's just chemical. But it turns into extramarital affairs very quickly, right? Because so much stuff that happens in us, in our feelings, is directed by these outward stimuli. You meet my needs, I'll feel a certain way, right? And it just shapes us. It's crazy. But it's huge, because if you know these things, you can change how you behave, and it becomes this big thing. It's awesome. The love bank is what we're going to talk about. And that is why I have Titus's piggy bank. Every person, the love bank is figurative. You do not actually have a pig inside you. I've eaten a lot of barbecue lately, I might. It's all of us have this emotional bank in us, right? All of us, you make deposits. So, I don't know, what's something? My wife
Brings you a sandwich.
brings me a sandwich on the couch, and that is?
Trains kid to do that.
That's like $1, isn't it?
What?
That's like $1 for
It's just a sandwich.
Breakfast in bed will be $1.
Yeah, all right, so then I get, Titus is about to make out like a bandit. So I get breakfast in bed one day, or coffee in bed. That's another one I really like. So that's $1, so that's a deposit made, right? Or if we're gonna go in the other direction, I make chocolate fondue and I spend an hour talking to her while we eat it, right? That's a quarter at least. Did I do better than a quarter? I get home from work and I say, how was your day, honey? Can you tell me about how that was? That must have been
Do you
hard.
sit and like pay attention, or do you just come in and say hi, how was it, and then?
It depends on the situation and whether or not the
It's
children
only
are on
like
fire.
5 cents, so.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, we'll make it a dime. I make dinner, right? That's a nice thing, or I do laundry or whatever.
$5.
$5? Got that kid?
No, seriously, Daniel did laundry the other day. I was like,
So laundry is at least 3/4.
Did you try to lose too much soap?
no.
Wait a minute, so he did it wrong and it was still a huge deposit.
I don't even know how he did it.
But it didn't matter
He did
because
put soap in. It was done.
Oh, you'll care later.
emotional needs are met, and there are different levels of emotional needs. Now watch this, right? There are intimate emotional needs and there are other emotional needs. Other emotional needs, like men have an emotional need that is domestic support, right? I come home, there's a steak on the table, and you know, the house is nice and everything else. That is domestic support. That is not an intimate emotional need, because having a steak on the table is not on the same level as having sex, right? It is not on the same level as doing something fun together, like playing a game or going to the park and walking or whatever, which men tend to be a little more recreationally, let's do something together. Come watch me fix the car, which is insane, but like, it's kind of cool, isn't it? You watch me do something and that's awesome. Like, the women are laughing, you don't understand, it's the truth. It is. Callan?
Come watch me work on this tractor.
Whatever. All right, now think about that for a second though. Like, there's actually a song about that, right? She thinks my tractor is, and the message is she likes to watch me work, she respects me, she,
Yeah, but she thinks my tractor's sexy, not she told me how to drive.
Oh! Well, but that's a point of, anyway. So we make these deposits. When we're dating, we make huge deposits, and we end up with this giant, like, full piggy bank, right? The day you get married, you have a full piggy bank, right? And actually, for what it's worth, that marriage day, that saying, I will spend the rest of my life with you, that is a 20, right? Like, that is the biggest deposit you can make in a woman's life, right? And then the honeymoon is the next 20 for the deposit for him, like, because all of a sudden this new need comes up, and it's like, wow, you can do this stuff together.
Where are you getting all this money from? He did not take that 20 out of the piggy bank. He did not.
Check your personal account, it's gone.
Doing something to meet a needs makes this positive deposit. Every time you do that, it makes a positive deposit. Now, here's where it gets tricky. If I neglect to do those things I was doing before, like we've been married for a little while and suddenly the things that I did every day, like having conversations, stop happening, right? And like she's hanging out waiting for me to have conversations with her, that's what happens.
Oh, you're
It's
thinking
not even real coins. What is that about?
Those aren't even real.
Why does that-
What? The conversation's been fake the whole time.
Wow.
She's got your number.
What ends up happening is the more you fail to meet your partner's needs, the more you start making your love units, right? And the worse it gets. And it gets to the point that I may do other things I'm supposed to do, right? But it doesn't matter because I can do other things as much as I want. If I got a hole in the bottom of the piggy bank, I can make deposits all day. It ain't gonna make it better, right? These would be things like if I stopped talking to my wife entirely. We never had conversations, but I did all kinds of other things. Oh, the first couple times it worked. It wouldn't matter how many deposits I made. If my wife stopped, like, if suddenly we stopped our marital relations, like, no more sex, right? That is a hole in the bottom of the love bank. Ain't no one way or the other about it, right? I mean, like, once you stop meeting each other's needs, the hole is there. You can do anything else in the world. If you don't do these things, it will not get better, okay? The other thing that screws this up, actually, I just talked about all this. Our desire to meet each other's needs, it begins to be taken for granted. We assume she's going to do these things, and so I stop doing mine, and then she stops doing hers. We can't forget that we have this responsibility. And if we meet the wrong need, it will not help. Does that make sense? My wife once gave me a dozen roses. Years and years ago when we were first married. And I looked at it and I thought, all right. That was really nice of you. You did. It may not have been a dozen. You gave me flowers once. To this day I remember, like, flowers.
And now I feel the same way.
Yeah, she hates flowers. I give her flowers, she doesn't want them, right? Because they just die. There are all sorts of things that we do for each other that don't actually meet the need, but we assume they do. The reality is, like, we begin to forget this. We begin to take it for granted. We begin to get busy. A lot of times husbands start doing their jobs, right? And the job is the most important thing. We're task doers. I got a checklist, right? First item on my checklist, get married. Second item, career, right? And I'm not working on this item anymore. I'm working on my career. And like a lot of times people struggle because of that. We stop meeting each other's needs and the big hole in the bottom of the piggy bank becomes a problem. There are 3 portions of this that we're going to talk about. We're going to do love busters for the next few weeks. These are holes in our piggy bank, because if you don't fix the holes in your piggy bank, you will never get better. Got it? Oh, am I running out of time?
Yes,
Sorry.
it's 8.
Is it? Oh, all right, I'll go. His Needs, Her Needs. These are 3 books. I read them. You can read them. You can skip all of this part if you want and just read the books. His Needs, Her Needs is a fantastic book. It's on His Needs, Her Needs. And then there's the last book is on negotiating. The last section will be on how to, like, discuss meeting each other's needs. My wife and I had a baby 2.5 years ago, and we didn't have a clear discussion about whose job it was to get up in the middle of the night and change the diaper and feed it, right? And so there were times when we would pretend to sleep and wait each other out. That was just me?
Yes.
There are times that, the big classical example of this is the husband who gets home from work, sits down with the newspaper and turns the TV on while the wife is cleaning and trying to take care of the kids and make dinner. And she says, hey, you know, and the husband assumes you do these things, I don't, right? And that's kind of what it is. Like, you have to kind of negotiate and understand what it is. A lot of times we don't do that. We jump right into other behaviors, which we'll talk about next week. Love busters. The quick introduction for next week. These are behaviors that impact your spouse in a way that makes withdrawals. There are 2 types. The first type is related to arguing in an effort to force the other person to behave the way you want them to, right? Huge, 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 huge thing. If I'm trying to, that is actually the husband sitting on the couch watching TV, reading the paper, kids are screaming, dinner's burning, the floor is getting vacuumed, and he lifts his feet up so that she can, you know, it was very helpful, and she stops and says, why don't you get off the couch and help? And that is, like, clearly an appropriate demand, but it is exactly that. It is a demand, right? And it is usually, you know, if you demand something from me, how am I going to respond? I may do what you want, but even if I do, I'm not going to feel good about it. And so some of this is about, like, figuring out how to relate and interact. This is where you get into shouting at each other to get what you want, right? Or, like, all the other things we do, talking down to each other, being demeaning. And then the second half of the Love Busters will be all about bad habits and communication failures and thoughtlessness and that kind of junk. Got it? And that was it. This is my last slide. I'm sorry I went a little past 8. Does anybody have any questions? How do you get the money out of this thing?
You don't, it's tight, because now you put it in his bank.
You got the 20.
I got the 20.
Yes.
All right.
You can
Yeah, probably
Thoughts?
keep some of that in there, I'm sure.
Dreams, hopes, visions. I'm putting the plastic money back in.
Yeah, you're gonna get that someday and be like, yes,
He's
no.
gonna see this video someday and say, hey, Dad,
Hey.
$20.
Where's my interest? All right. Well, next week we will start talking about each of those things in depth. The spiritual, the heart, mind stuff, and then actions. And all of this stuff will be hugely applicable and it'll be awesome. If you have questions about things or if you have specific stuff you want me to talk about, let me know and I will do my best. Okay? We will talk about children, we will talk about sex, we will talk about all that other stuff. Just FYI. Probably I won't bring diagrams and stuff like that, but we can talk about it. That is all.
I would love to see him with a diagram up there. He would not.
See, but you don't understand that I can actually just stand up and talk about anything.
Yes.
Really?
Oh, no.